Thank you all so much for joining us today for Creating and Structuring Data to Create Deeper Relationships, brought to you by MilkCrate and ParsonsTKO. Just to go over the logistics one more quick time, we're using the chat for intros, but it's also where you can post your questions during and after. And we will have time for Q&A at the end, and we are recording. The agenda today, we're doing the first part, the introductions and the review. We're going to have 20 minutes from ParsonsTKO, and then 20 minutes from myself talking about MilkCrate, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions and discussion. Just a quick intro about myself. I am the CEO and founder of MilkCrate. We are a tech company here in Philadelphia. We work with nonprofits to help them take their programs, volunteer initiatives, and training programs from offline to online using our templated, affordable mobile app system. So we basically make it fun for your audiences to engage in content and communication and to track all of that using your own mobile app for your nonprofit. I'm also heavily involved in nonprofits outside of my work with them as the president of my civic association and on the board of several nonprofits here in the area. And I worked in the nonprofit arena for several years, including working at Planned Parenthood. I also worked as a case manager for an organization here in Philly called the Maternity Care Coalition, and did some research at Penn and have just lots of love and diverse experiences in the nonprofit world before founding a company that works with them. And when I'm not 32 weeks pregnant and on quarantine, I am practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My contact info is here in case you want to get in touch with me afterwards, and I'll also be following up with everyone as well. Nate?
Lovely, thank you. So, hey everybody, I'm Nate Parsons. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and one of the founders at ParsonsTKO. We're a digital engagement consulting agency, and so my own background was as a computer programmer for 10 years or so, and then I did user experience and design work for about 4 or 5 years, and then I kind of started to meld those together into sort of large-scale strategy of like how you should actually sort of engage with your users. And and working inside agencies for both commercial and nonprofit organizations, I met other like-minded people, and one of those was my co-founder Tony Confessioni, who's lurking on this call as well. He was at the Pew Charitable Trust at the time. And I've worked for all sorts of places and all sorts of scales, from the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, that's that acronym, to Twitter, to the Associated Press, to the Atlantic Council, to MacArthur Foundation, so all sorts of different places. And from all that diverse experience, one of the things that I've been trying to create and sort of share with people is sort of a mental framework for how to think about all of the complexities of engaging users online as a sort of holistic mental model, and that's something we're going to kind of dive into a little bit today. And so, we start out here with, won't you be my neighbor? So, sort of a focus of our talk today, or my talk today, is going to be on data. But when we talk about data online, what we're really talking about is like listening and hearing people, and I think that's an important thing to think about. I think data is often sort of presented in the context of, are you being successful? Or how well are we doing, as opposed to what are our users telling us? And I think that that's a really important part of any kind of mental model around how you organize your data and what the framework should be and what the structure of your data should be, is that if it's not really helping you have better and deeper conversations with people, then you might not have the data organized in the right way. And, when we dive into the aspects, it's complex because you have data about all sorts of things online as well. So how do you kind of figure out what are the through lines of conversation and all the data you're collecting? Let's dive into that a little bit. So, the conversations are complex online, and part of that is that you start out with these two strangers meeting in the dark kind of experience, where somebody finds you either through Twitter or a web search or through a recommendation or a Facebook post or whatever it is, and often they've never heard of you and you have no idea who they are. And you have that kind of first touch experience. And I call that second sort of thing delivering initial value, and it's kind of businessy, but I think it sort of speaks to that kind of virtuous exchange that you're trying to have when you have a conversation. Like somebody told you something funny or interesting, and you gave them a little emotional boost or a little wisdom or education that helps them, and because of that, they sort of are thankful and they want to communicate and share something back with you. And as you do that, you deepen understanding of both parties. You get to know what they're interested in, they get to know what you're about. And if you can continually facilitate that engagement, you start to build a real connection and affinity with that person. And that's where people are willing to do more things like, come to your event, share more of their personal information with you, have a deeper connection. And then once you started that, maintenance is important. I think everybody has had that friend who's had a life event or something and disappeared on them, and that's sad, sad and frustrating, and that kind of breaks the relationship a little bit. And this whole virtuous cycle is happening on the web or in digital communications at scale. It's not one-to-one, it's hundreds of these at once. And so I think that's another sort of challenge for a lot of organizations, is how do you actually scale a personal relationship. And so if we move on here, our approach to doing this is to create a mental model of what your digital memory should look like. And at ParsonsTKO we call this engagement architecture. And that's really just a sort of fancy term for our methodology and our approach to how we organize data. And we think there are these sort of 7 macro pieces of that interaction, of that engagement. And it starts at the depending on where you look, at either the platform or data level. Platform, people, processes, and strategy are a lot about your sort of capacity to sort of work with people. And experiences, engagement, and data are really the actual engagement you're having with those folks. And both of those things can either help, hinder, or accelerate the kind of connections you're building with people. Next, please. So if we talk a little bit about the left side, this capacity for conversations, I think this is one of the places where you start to think about how you structure your data. I think that platforms are often something that people focus on, like, oh, we don't have the right email platform or whatnot. I think people are often something that people don't take into the equation as much and don't communicate out. I think that it's difficult sometimes, and it's challenging to sort of talk about your capacity or your expertise in different areas, and to measure that and show people what could be done with more or less of that. And then business process plays in that too, how efficient things are. And often this can be things like sign off. Like, most people have had the experience of having something ready to go, and then a CEO or somebody sees the creative and they're like, oh, that's not really how I want it to look. And suddenly this, multi-step complex operation grinds to a halt to do, create outreach, because we have to go through the process again. And then that comes up to strategy. I mean, it's not uncommon for groups to focus on the wrong part of their strategy. When I say that, I mean that, sometimes people are really worried about expanding the number of people who hear about the organization, and they're not actually taking advantage of the people who they're meeting. And other times people have a really well-developed way to sort of engage with folks, but it's a very insular community. They're not creating enough on-ramps for new people to become part of it. Yeah, and when we dive into the next piece, we can talk a little bit about, the quality of conversation. And so, experiences, engagement, and data are really about how powerful and how engaging your interactions are with users. And, I think it's useful to split out experiences and engagement. I think experiences are a little bit capacity based and a little bit what you're offering. I think that, one of the experiences that everyone is sort of struggling with right now, that's, good to illustrate a point here, is events. If you used to have in-person events or bring people in the organization or convene groups of experts together or anything like that, that is all moving into the virtual world. And creating a parity of experience there is difficult. I think some physical events, people would greet people, they take their coats, they give them a coffee, they kind of create this warm emotional experience of the physical interaction, even for the people speaking or the people attending. And how do you create a similar and, welcoming virtual experience is difficult. And I think that, that's a place where, data could help explain to management what the change moment is, what the capacity need is, why, even though hosting a virtual event is less work, it may not be in terms of creating the parity of experience. And I think that's an important part of the data picture, right? Because I think we all know those things, sort of subjectively, but how can you, sort of prove that point out? And, data is one of the pieces that tied to engagement experiences kind of helps you figure that out. And so if we move on here, we will.
Sorry.
No worries, no worries.
I'm going to quickly turn off my notifications because I'm realizing I should have done that at the beginning and it's not.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No worries. So this is just a little pyramid point, that I use to kind of illustrate this, which is that it's common for organizations to kind of focus on the technology as the limiting factor. Like, oh, if only we had a different X, we would be doing so well, And I think this is one of the things that the data can help you prove out, because I think one of the other pieces of that quality of engagement and the capacity of engagement is really the configuration of your systems and the people you have running them and the capacity they have to use those systems. And, most organizations, don't necessarily have the worst tool for what they're trying to do. What they have is a bad setup for using that tool. And that setup really isn't just in the technology level. It's in the capacity level, the understanding level, the messaging level, the engagement level. And if we start to think about these as a taxonomy for data, you can start to sort of see where you're getting stuck in terms of which thing needs the most help. Like, is it that, we're only able to spend 4 hours a week in this tool, and we think to actually create value out of it would take 12 hours. Now you're having a different conversation than if you're telling people like the email system isn't working for us, right? And I think that that's one of the values of data, that helps create illustrative points about, how and why you need to change what you're doing. So if we move on, we will now talk a little bit about how data can help answer that question. And so, modeling data is really important. And I think this is where the mental framework is going to come into play and be a little more concrete, which is that, here are just 3 kinds of examples of things that you could measure. The editorial process, like how long and how much effort does it take to create content versus the engagement that content creates. That kind of report in and of itself is extremely valuable for changing behavior. I think almost every organization I've ever consulted with has at least one of these content types or one of these things you make every year that you're like, we spend 3 weeks making this thing and like 100 people click on it. And we don't even think those are the right 100 people. Those aren't even our influencers or our funders that are clicking on it. And so if you can measure the effort to the result, that's really valuable. And so that's a report most people have pretty, easy access to. You can mock this up. And the other thing I'd say is that for data, don't be so worried about it being completely accurate. You might be like, I don't want our team to fill out time cards. Not a problem. If you have a way to even t-shirt size these efforts, that's really valuable. If you can say, this is a large effort and this is a small effort, you're already starting to create data. So don't be too worried if you're like, oh, I'm not sure if I can justify this 15 minutes or whatnot. We don't need that kind of scale necessarily. The next time is, what I call real-time production monitoring, which is to say, these conversations, like we mentioned earlier, need to be kind of maintained and built and nurtured, and you need to have the right mix of content. If you're only writing content for people who've never met you, all the people who've met you aren't being serviced. If you're writing content simply for experts, you're not necessarily on-ramping other people, and you're not necessarily helping people who know experts connect them, their network to your network. And so that's another piece of it. And so just knowing what you're making of what types, what the cadence is, and sort of letting people know what you can do is really helpful. And that's especially helpful when people want you to change what you're doing in a pandemic moment. If you have a sense of like what your current capacity and capabilities are, when people want you to shift things, you can now have more intelligent conversations about what the trade-offs are going to be. Like, oh, well, if we do X, we're going to have to remove Y, because I think there's often an expectation that somehow we can just throw some more stuff on the fire and it'll be great. And then this last thing, sort of what I call content performance lifecycle. It's another sort of jargony term, but what it really means is that some of your content is very ephemeral. It has an impact for a day or 2 days. It kind of is like a tweet almost. It has a very short shelf life. Other content is very useful and evergreen, and it might be something like, what's the 5-year plan, or it might be a seminal research paper or whatnot. And I think that if you have a sort of content performance lifecycle, you can also explain to people why it's useful to spend effort on old things and things you've already created versus new things. Because I think that's another challenge for communications, is that everything you communicate tomorrow isn't necessarily better than what you communicated yesterday. And I think being able to tie together the quality work you've done and the new work that you're doing is really valuable. But it's really hard to justify going back and refreshing and focusing on existing content and existing engagement. And so if you can help visualize for folks what the performance lifecycle on average is for the kind of content you're creating and why you need to promote and use stuff you've already made, that kind of can help change your operations as well. So these are just 3 little vignette examples of how you can use data and think about data to have better conversations. And if we move to the next slide. One of the things I think is most valuable for folks in terms of starting to do this is to create a sort of conversational dashboard. And this is really one of the best visual metaphors for data that you can give people inside your organization. And what we have on the right here is something that you can work towards. It doesn't necessarily have to be completely powered on day one, but you want to be able to sort of visualize this person, a particular person, and say, we know who this person is, we know their contact information, we also know the things they're interested in, the way they want to consume that content, and where they are in our process. So on that bottom right, you'll see, it might be a little hard to read, recommended next engagement is educate for this user. That's really valuable. So if you can start to say, we have these individuals that we really care about, but we have these populations within them that we're trying to service, and we know the kind of content they need and the cadence they need that content to be delivered on them, now you're starting to build a content operations model that is both backed by data, informed by data, and helps explain to people what you're actually doing with the content operations and the data that you're getting back. Like, you know, in terms of affinity here, this is sort of a little stretch goal. It's hard to do affinity right at the beginning, but you can see that this person is less interested in global security and more interested in renewable energy. And so that can even help you decide, are you going to turn somebody off with a call to action, or are you going to, you know, have something be positive? And so this is really valuable for sharing between development teams and communications teams and other groups like that, because now you kind of have a shared understanding of what you're trying to do. And, you know, this is a little simplified for a lot of organizations. These would be more specific to like your major events and things like that. But you can kind of get a sense from this, just looking at data in this way and formatting the data in this way, it's suddenly something people want and it sounds really valuable, versus when, you know, people pulled up Google Analytics reports or whatever and said like, this thing got 55 hits in the last 90 days. And then people all look at each other and they're like, great, you know, this actually tells you, was that worth doing? You know, is it useful? Should we change what we're up to? And if we go forward, one of the things this also does is it creates your roadmap for potential improvement. So once you're sort of saying, what do we want to know about people? How do we want to identify them? Now you start to think about each of those engagement touch points you have with somebody and what you want to collect and what data is really important out of all that data that's available starts to really percolate up really easily. So for an event, knowing who spoke at the event is something that's really valuable. Those often are your biggest like sort of brand boosters who aren't necessarily your direct constituents. But that's often not tracked as tightly as the people who attended an event. And, you know, so those are the kinds of things that you can start to think about, like, maybe we need to include that in our profiles about people. Maybe that data is more valuable than we thought. And then, you know, like CRM and email data, you know, what is your last touch point? Like, if somebody's starting to not engage with you, that's a really good population to look at. You know, that group tells you a lot about, you know, are you collecting enough information to know if that you're targeting that person right? Are you not creating the right cadence of data? They're sort of your canaries in the coal mine. And so thinking about why people are becoming less engaged with you is actually as interesting sometimes as why they're engaging with you. And that's a little, you know, counterintuitive to people. And I think that's another useful thing these profiles can help you do. You start thinking about the data of your touch points differently. It's less about volume, it's less about scale, and to some extent it's even less about reach. It's more about quality of interaction. And so that's like a key part of having like this data framework and model. Yeah, so how do we do in time? I think I kind of zoomed through a little bit, but that was, you know, in brief, our mental model. Yeah, and here's, you know, if you want to continue this conversation, here's just a bunch of ways to talk to us. Our blog is on there, which has long form versions of me and the rest of ParsonsTKO waxing poetic about this topic. And we'd love to just chat with you, anyone about this. But yeah, there's specificities to everybody's particular situation, and we'd love to just kind of wrap with you about any of those. So thank you very much. And yeah, please fire any questions you have or throw them in the chat, and I'll hand it back to Morgan. Thanks.
Thank you, Nate. That was fantastic. I think you're the first co-presenter who's ever ended a few minutes ahead of time. That's very impressive.
I talked really fast. Thank you.
All right. So before I get into my presentation, I wanted to just kind of get a feel for who we have online today. How many of you are running a program? Like you're the program director or the program coordinator for a volunteer initiative or a group of beneficiaries or members or participants. You know, I saw a lot of you are like founders and directors, but I know that this content is relevant for people who are kind of at the top of the organizational pyramid, but then it's most, it always helps me to know if there's anyone who's particularly like on the ground running this kind of thing. So that's where we really shine in the kind of challenges we love to solve. So feel free to enter that into the chat. So what I'm going to go over today, I'm just going to kind of give an overview of how MilkCrate works as a product, since we are a platform that launches apps. I want to make sure that you guys kind of understand the mechanics and the language that I'm using, since sometimes this tech language is new for nonprofit folks. I'm also going to go over some analog and digital engagement tools that you might already be using at your organization, and I want to hear about challenges you might be having with them. Then we're going to talk about some data that we've found from Pew around who has a smartphone, who doesn't, and to kind of help you think about the demographics of how to reach people. We're going to have a little conversation about custom versus templated design. This is really to help anyone who isn't familiar with tech development and design, so that you can really understand what's the best way to save money so that you can get something built on a budget. And then this is just so incredibly important: when an app makes sense and when it doesn't. I find that half of the time what we're doing at MilkCrate isn't selling an app to a nonprofit, but in fact educating a nonprofit about when it makes sense and when it doesn't, to help them avoid doing something that isn't necessary. And we're going to give some case studies of success stories so you can kind of get a better feel for that, and kind of ending on the virtuous cycle that we like to create, and that we're trying to support between foundations, the funders, and the nonprofits, and the people that they serve, and the data that gets created by the work that we do, and the MilkCrate apps that we launch. So right off the bat, one thing I want to make clear, in case it isn't, although probably all of you understand this, but it's something I find I'm always explaining. You know, in the nonprofit world, so much of the technology is developed to focus on donors, donor management, getting more money out of donors. And that's very, very important. But then there's these two other groups: volunteers and the people that you're serving. And there often isn't nearly as much energy or technology devoted to supporting the engagement and tracking of these groups. And that's where MilkCrate really is focused. What we do is we allow nonprofits to affordably and quickly launch for your nonprofit program a mobile app where you can choose from ready-to-go features that match your engagement and tracking needs. So getting people to sign in for a volunteer shift, or watching a video, answering a poll question, things like that. And having an admin dashboard where the people who are running the program can manage their users, add a new poll question, create a new event, send out a push notification, and track activity reports so they can see what's going on. Here's a quick example to really bring it to life for you, hopefully. The Committee of 70 is a nonprofit based here in Philadelphia, focused on civic engagement. And every year they would try and get more businesses to sign up for this program called We Vote. But it was a very analog kind of program where businesses would say, yes, I want to cultivate a culture of civic engagement and motivate my employees to vote. Send me materials and I'll hang it up in the lunchroom or something. Now, problem number one, especially today, a lot of employees aren't in the office. But in addition to that, it was just a very passive way of sharing information without really knowing who was engaging and how to make it easier for them to engage. And so we launched the We Vote app, where every employer who participates in this program has their own team in the app. All the employees have their own profile, and they're constantly seeing new ways that they can be more civically engaged by reading articles, learning about candidates, making sure that they're signed up to vote, voting. All of those things can be structured as content and reminders and things like that in the app, as well as poll questions and surveys. And now each employee, as they're doing these things, are earning points, and you can actually see on the leaderboard which employer is doing better. And it's a really fun, engaging way to take this program to the next level. And even more importantly than just being fun and engaging, it's trackable. So the outputs and outcomes that are possible that can be tracked transparently and automatically is something that MilkCrate's really excited to be able to do for a client like this, where we can say there were 450 instances of voters viewing the voter guide in this election cycle. And app users were 50% more likely to vote after downloading the app at least 1 week before the election. So it's a really nice concrete example of how a more engaging and trackable experience for the users led to the outputs and outcomes that the program really needs to be able to prove, to go back to their funders and say, look, we're succeeding, the program's working, keep supporting us, keep funding us so we can grow this program. We do work with a lot of different types of nonprofits, not just civic ones. There's volunteer initiatives, education and training, and others. So I'll show a few other examples of those later on. Oh, we already asked that question. So here are the analog and digital tools that some of you might be using. I'm curious, are any of you like, oh yeah, I use that and I hate it, or that's been the backbone of my program? Anyone have anything to share about these tools? No? Okay. Well, at least I got a sip of water out of it. So that was my next question, was how many of you are kind of struggling with these tools? Well, something that might help frame the context of what tools are working or which tools should we be considering. I often get the question from the nonprofits that we talk to at MilkCrate. They'll say, well, what's the best way to reach everyone? Or they'll say, well, not everyone has a smartphone, so we can't do an app. And it's like, well, it's true. Not everyone does, but there is no magic bullet for reaching every single person in every demographic. However, this next slide, I hope, will shed some light on what is probably news to some of you, which is that the majority of Americans have a smartphone across every single demographic: age, race, education, income, and geography. In fact, other than 65 and older, at least 71% of people in every category have a smartphone. So I think that that's often eye-opening for people, particularly programs that are serving a low-income community. That's something that you should really know, is that they actually do have smartphones, and that it's a great way to try and reach them, often more so than something that's designed for maybe a desktop computer experience. So that's something I wanted to make sure is known, because that's really going to be important information as you think about what's the best way to reach the people I'm serving. Now, I've created this diagram to try and really clearly summarize when does an app make sense. And there's two basic fundamental things that we look for when we're evaluating, can we help this nonprofit? Is a MilkCrate app a good fit? And those two main things are, is this program in need of consistent engagement over the long term? So not a weekend, a one weekend program or an event, but something that's like people sign up to participate for weeks, months, years at a time. And not only are they signed up to participate for that long period of time, but there's something they're supposed to be doing on a weekly, monthly basis where you need to be able to share stuff with them and get information back, maybe facilitate communication as well. The second thing is behavior data. Does it matter to you to know who is doing what when? So not only do you want to make it easy for people to participate, but you need to know if they're participating and who's participating and when, and maybe even why. Now, if you meet both of those criteria, then we're super excited to talk to you, because that means we can really help you and do it in a kind of fast, affordable way, instead of you trying to figure this out on your own and build it from scratch, which is a terrible idea. We really hate to see when we come across a nonprofit that's like, oh yeah, we spent 3 years and $300,000 building this thing and it doesn't even work the way we want it to. That's heartbreaking, because we want to make all of that go away. So when apps are valuable, so this is kind of breaking it down in a little more detail. So you have a goal to better engage your program participants and track data. You have found a way, and this is often where MilkCrate can be helpful, is to figure out how can the app be valuable to your end users to make it easier for them to complete activities, consume content, communicate. The app has to really be useful to them in order for them to actually want to download it and keep it on their phone. Similarly, the staff have to find value in it. It has to make it easier for them to do their jobs, to communicate, to share content, to track. Those are the kind of verbs that program staff are always doing, and we want to make it more efficient and effective for them to do it using this tool. And then finally, there has to be a value to the funders. So like I said, with the Committee of 70 example, like when you can show the board you have outcome data for a program that never had it before, that's going to really open their eyes to the power of how mobile technology like this can really show impact and the impact of their dollars and their investment in that program. So I'm curious if anyone's ever explored an app before and found that it was going to be too much time, money, or beyond your expertise to handle. Because those are the three things we're always hearing as a challenge. And that's typically what happens if you wind up talking to a custom development shop that's like, oh, we'll build you your perfectly tailored custom app from scratch. We're going to write a brief. We're going to wireframe it. We're going to build it, test it, launch it, and do these updates. And it's going to take 18 months to 2 years to build and get it launched, and a few $100,000. Sound good? And then every nonprofit like hangs up the phone and is like, oh my God, we can't possibly do that. Which makes sense, because you guys don't have the time, money, or expertise to manage something like that. That's why MilkCrate exists, to be the templated, quick, affordable version where instead of building everything from scratch, we have existing templated features that you can pick and choose from, so that it's fast to launch and easy to support. And typically something like 1/10 of the cost of something custom, the right features built for a nonprofit's needs, and we can launch in weeks or months instead of years, and having that whole process be supported by a client support specialist. These are some of the templates that we offer. You can see a much more exhaustive list on our website if you go to milkcrate.tech and click on features. But an events calendar, which can also be a really robust volunteer management calendar, push notifications, GPS check-ins, so you can track people going to specific locations, which is something really powerful that a smartphone can do much better than any other kind of device or interface. Polls and surveys that are built right into the app, so you don't have to send an email with a Survey Monkey link, but instead the survey is just one more piece of content that exists in the app that people get points for and can be tracked. Being able to segment your users into different groups, so that we vote example where each employer was a different team. You can also do that with like different stages in a program or different geographies, where those people in those different groups are seeing different content. Now, the way it would typically flow is you would say, okay, everyone, all of our volunteers now download the United Way for Michigan app that MilkCrate has built for us. Look for it in the App Store, create your profile, join the Center City District team, and then start earning points for logging your volunteer hours. And then the program staff would be able to see everybody doing that and all the data being revealed on the back end. Now, I wanted to give a couple examples that are particularly relevant for what we're dealing with right now in the world in terms of quarantine and social distancing and how that's impacting programs. Let me just check time. Oh, we're doing great. So Inner City Capital Connections is a program that runs in 8 different cities across the country. And we were lucky enough to partner up with them about a year before quarantine happened and launched their app. So it was really nice to hear from them when we checked in with all of our clients and said, so how is this impacting you? What can we do to help? They were saying, it's so great that our hybrid in-person and online program can now be even more, or didn't have to hit so many speed bumps because we already had a digital platform in place. And so that was really great to see. But we've also met with a lot of nonprofits and even started launching apps for nonprofits that had to figure something out after quarantine hit. And actually, I'll jump to that one first. So Jersey Cares is an example of a nonprofit that started talking to us back in, I think, April. So they were tasked with helping seniors get groceries delivered to their homes by volunteers so that the seniors didn't have to go out and risk getting exposed. And so we were able to use our existing templated system of the events calendar to create orders for volunteer shifts so that each volunteer can sign up for a grocery order for a senior at a particular home address and then pick up their groceries, deliver it, take a photo of the delivery to track it, and have everything be kind of verified and seamless for the volunteers. Here's an example of a nonprofit program that we supported that's also a volunteer initiative. Sorry, I'm 32 weeks pregnant and I can't breathe. I always get so winded. Whew. Okay, so the Reading Captain program, this is an initiative run by the Free Library of Philadelphia. And Jenny Begoni, the executive director, was telling us how these volunteers would carry around 4-inch binders with all the materials they had to share with each family as they went door to door to talk to families about how to help their kids get on grade reading level. And one of the things that, that was an impediment, the 4-inch binder with all these materials, and then trying to collect data on that paper from the volunteers about what happened. Now the volunteers can just download the Reading Captain app. They have all the information organized by age range. And then every time they do something in the app, it gets tracked. And anytime they have feedback or want to share something that they learned or a positive experience they had, they can do that in the app as well. And so Jenny has all the qualitative and quantitative data she needs to track these volunteers. This is a youth-focused example. So teens are the ones downloading the Youth Volunteer Corps app. This app is designed to make it easy for them to volunteer in their community, which obviously during COVID has become impossible. But what the team at YVC was able to do is pivot and create digital experiences for the kids in the app, like doing a plastic audit at home or signing e-cards and sending cards to cancer patients. So they found a way to keep the program going digitally, even when the kids couldn't go out into the world. Last example, this is not a volunteer example. This is a kind of training program. Philly Startup Leaders runs an accelerator, and every week there's new content. There's mentor check-ins and chats that need to happen, and assignments that need to be completed. And the app we built for them allows them to easily engage with the people in the program and track all of that. My final slide, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, this is kind of what my blue sky dream scenario is that MilkCrate is helping the funders that are giving money to nonprofits. Well, when the funders give money to nonprofits, those nonprofits are able to launch a mobile app that helps them better engage their program participants or volunteers. Those program participants and volunteers find it fun and easy to participate, and everything that they're doing becomes trackable, so that it's easy to see the data of what's going well in the program, and so that that information can be instantly funneled back to the funders to ensure that the program keeps getting funded and can be supported so it can continue to do the good work that it's doing. So this is the kind of MilkCrate virtuous cycle that we hope to create around data and tracking programs. So now we have an amazing 20 minutes for questions and discussion. Before we do that, I want to just show you, I'm going to send you a link to this survey. Just a couple quick questions. You can see it's just like 5 questions. We would really appreciate you guys taking the time to answer this. I'm going to put the link right here in the chat. We will also send this as a follow-up email, but I just want to make sure you have it now. So in case you're feeling shy and you don't have any questions, you can just do that right now. So let me stop presenting. And I'm going to go look in the questions because it looks like we've got a bunch, which is fantastic. Oh, Nate, you've been like chatting it up in here. Awesome.
Couldn't help myself.
I'm scrolling. Okay, so do you want to summarize for us? It looks like you're having a great conversation here with some people.
Yeah, just a couple of the questions were around, well, one was how do we create these profiles? And, you know, I guess the general advice I give folks is to start with just a piece of paper and figure out what you want on there before you go looking for a profile making tool. Often the way that you want those to be data powered and automated means that you're going to want to build them close to your CRM or whatever your audience interaction tracking system is. You know, we've built them in a whole bunch of different tools. If you're on Salesforce, Salesforce has all sorts of tools for it. We've used Microsoft Power BI, we've used Google Data Studio. So don't get too focused on the tool until you have the sort of frame for those. The other question we had is, what's the best way to sort of get all of this data in one place and how to integrate this and build an engagement platform? And there aren't really a lot of great all-in-one solutions. The one that I have been intrigued by recently has been HubSpot's CMS offering, which now starts to wrap together CMS, CRM, and email together in one platform that's pretty powerful. But that's a very expensive solution. So you have to be at a scale or willing to spend, you know, 50 to 80K a year on that kind of thing plus startup costs. So if that scale sounds too big for you, there are other options, but the best options at the lower end are usually for folks to find a series of friendly tools that have built data integrations that they're supporting between those tools so that you're not having to build and manage the cost of connecting the data together yourself. And so your shopping list decision points have a big impact on how easy it is and how expensive it is to get this data together. So those are just a couple of the questions that we heard. Yeah.
And Michael, I saw you said you manage a community platform for 11,000 people. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Mine's a membership organization, so we have like 70,000 employees of electric utilities that are the members of that. And using a platform called Higher Logic, we have communities built out for different job functions at those businesses. So communicators, finance people, CEO, safety professionals, etc. And I manage that platform and sort of the engagement of the people through it.
Got it. Okay, great. And then I saw a little farther down, what is it? Ted Johnson said, I've experienced the opposite, an organization that already had an app but could not convince leadership to add more engagement features. Ted, can you tell us more about that? I think you might still be on mute. Oh, I can't unmute you. You're going to have to do it. Down at the bottom, you should see a little microphone icon. If you just hover over the screen that we're in, down at the bottom, there's a microphone, phone, and video icon.
I got it. Thanks.
Awesome. Yep.
Sorry. You ever been in that situation where you're in full screen mode on a Mac and then you can't find the tab that you were?
Yep.
I was working on I was answering questions on your questionnaire.
Oh, thank you.
I just thought it was an interesting contrast to the scenario that you described, because we had a data collection app for the NGO I used to work for, and as a marketing guy, I came up with a whole bunch of interesting ways that we could drive engagement, provide data, useful data for managers and stakeholders right in the app, and things like that. And our leadership, their MO was to, go to the USAID website or the World Bank website and look at what features big donors were throwing money at, and bringing innovation around user engagement was nothing that anybody was asking for. And so what I tried to do, and did not succeed, was saying, if we could start generating data on what users are doing, we might be able to come to these donors and say, look at this innovative thing that we've done. Why don't you throw money at that instead of throwing money at solutions that you heard about, at a conference 2 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I'd be happy to talk to them now if you think it's worth trying.
Yeah, I don't work for them no more.
Okay. Anyone have any new questions that have come up or things they want to build upon from the chat we've had? I'm going to also just, again, put my email down here in case anyone thinks of anything before I get around to messaging you guys if you think of something. But I will be sending out an email to everyone that registered, and it'll include the survey link. And if you want to get a recording or the slides or both, let me know and just fill out the survey and you'll get them. I'm going to stop recording now.